those exhibits were about highlighting the impacts of inaction on climate pollution to real people, folks who have lost homes, had to move their entire life.
Welcome to a special holidays edition of Sierra Club Canada's The Environment in Canada podcast. Today we're going to be talking about what we achieved this past year and what we're looking forward to in the new year. Since the last holiday special podcast, I have once again sat down and rewritten the music for the podcast to include even more bells, because I think it's just something that everybody needs this particular season. In today's podcast, I'm going to be talking with Gretchen Fitzgerald, our National Programs Director at Sierra Club Canada. And if you're tuning in for the first time, I'm your host, Connor Curtis, Head of Communications at Sierra Club Canada. It's been a big year for our organization, as Gretchen and I get into. And there's a lot more that we're looking forward to doing in the year to come. Please see our previous holidays podcast, sort of part one of this holidays two-part special that's specifically on how to talk with family and friends about environmental issues during the holidays, how to talk about things like climate change, productive ways forward on conversations that move past the political theater. That is the previous episode to this one, and it's definitely worth checking out. And also, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on CHMA Radio in Sackville, New Brunswick on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Atlantic Daylight Time. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe to get the latest episodes from us. Also, a reminder this holiday season that if you are planning to donate to us, please do so online or on the phone. The number and link will be below the podcast. We are standing in solidarity with Canada Post workers. Gretchen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. And thank you, Connor, for making time in this holiday season. Really appreciate it.
Well, I figure we've got one last day to record and do podcasts. It's Friday today when we're recording this anyway. But a lot of stuff this year, and wanted to chat to you about what has happened, what we've been able to achieve, what's coming up in the new year too for people, maybe if there's things that you're really excited about. For those listening in, do you want to say who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Gretchen Fitzgerald, and I'm National Programs Director with Sierra Club. So that's a really fun position where I get to work with all of the projects that we cover and try to figure out strategically how we advance the goals of our decade-long commitment to the decade of change. So yeah, and I'm based in Tuktoyaktuk, Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I imagine somehow that you get a chance to chat with a lot of different parts of the club, and it's quite a large organization in a way. We're a small organization, but we're a large organization because there's so many different things going on and so many people are involved in in different aspects of work. So I'm curious, are there highlights, things from the past year that, especially things that maybe we haven't been covering that much in the podcast, but things that happened that you think are worth discussing?
Yeah, I mean, I often, when I talk to people about Sierra Club, quote the Vinyl Cafe, Stuart McLean, we may not be big, but we're small, but we're kind of the reverse. We may not be small, but we're big because we may have a core staff that's small, but through our various chapters and alliances, and essentially by virtue of being a grassroots organization, we can really get active at a granular level, but we can also raise issues at national and international levels as well. We kind of have, in my view, the best of both worlds here. But yeah, thinking back to 2024, and let's face it, as we close out the year, it is a pretty hectic time, so it is all feeling a bit of a blur. So do you feel this was a bit of an inflection year for climate action? I mean, it was an inflection year for so many progressive issues. I think we all sense that and feel
Mm.
that at sort of a high zeitgeist level. Feel that the effects of COVID came home to roost this year in terms of ruptures in the social fabric and lack of trust in institutions,
Mm.
and inflation and the affordability crisis, and housing, and I think really the crisis with fentanyl and drug use, and a lot of these things really coming home to roost, and seeing that questioning and various levels of our lives of, why do things work this way, and why do things work in a way that seem to benefit very few people,
Yeah.
a lot more than the rest of us. So yeah, it's actually kind of a hard year to encapsulate because of that shift that I think we are all experiencing right now. I mean, maybe if there's a word for it, it's it is sort of rupture to me for this year. I don't know
Yeah.
how you feel about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of those things have existed as crises for people for a long period of time.
That's so true. Yeah.
Because it's not just, I think we're starting to realize, and people are starting to see that, like, we have all these structures and these systems that are supposed to theoretically be there for people, but in fact are not a long time. I think, it's not to put some weight on the fact that things have gotten worse, right? Because we have seen obviously a huge wealth divide across the board and in various different countries where some people just have access to, it seems like, everything, and other people have access to basically nothing. Or even if you're in some sort of middle ground, it's like you spend a lot of your life just working to try and put away something, and then that gets counted as like, oh, you've kind of made it. But it's like, well, no, you're actually like working continuously just to hopefully have a few future, right? Like, I think too, the problem is our standard for what people should have in life has become, oh, well, you're at least alive, well, then that's good. But that's not the standard we should be facing. It's not the standard most people want for their families. I think that's that those are all systemic issues that I think if we don't, unless we actually deal with them, climate crisis is making all of this worse, of course, because it's forcing people into, it's creating all these impacts that are then forcing people into worse and worse situations. It's creating leverage points where people are using the topics of climate change as divisive tools rather than uniting tools, right? Like turning around and making it into an issue of us versus them, oh, well, now that we have limited resources, we have to prioritize our own. No, if we just dealt with this systemic issue, then we can fix this. But if we don't, there isn't really a solution, right? Unless you deal, I think that's the thing that's going to be coming back for people, is this wake up that if we can't fix the systemic issues, then there aren't actual real solutions out there. But the question is, will we see that put into an actual way forward, or is it just going to become a lot of concerned people and, not much actual progress, right? Is the question.
Yeah. And when I say the word rupture, I think, yeah, you're kind of hitting that, Connor, with it's not a bad thing that people are questioning, because it's true. Some of these systemic issues have been around for a long time, and now we're forced to confront them. And I think the job of an organization like ours and our membership and the alliances again that we're part of is to make this disruption become a creative moment rather than a destructive moment. And we haven't even talked about social media and the communications landscape, which is I know where you are so critical to our work. But yeah, those forces are really set up for the disruptive rather than the creative process, with some exceptions. So I think this is a real moment where I think the value of having folks who are in community, who understand local values, who can speak to their neighbors across some of the divides that are being created is so important. And I think that's why we can still get wins in this context. And in fact, we must use this moment as a moment for creativity, like I say, and hope rather than the reverse. But it is going to take work because there's a lot on the other side of the scale that's trying to push it the other way.
Yeah, I think a large part of it is literally just fighting the kind of self-defeatism that can happen, right? When you're up against a lot of big things, but there are lots of things that can be done. There's lots of ways to fight back against that stuff you talk about, like misinformation stuff, right? Like we know more and more about how to actually counter that stuff, and we're learning all the time. And people are starting to, I see it online because I've seen people for a long time. There's so much misinformation, they just didn't want to say anything. But I think that is starting to shift. You're seeing people start to go, oh no, I don't want to see this garbage.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
what you're seeing. And so that is a positive thing. I think that there's a media literacy maybe that was taking time to develop there, but I'm a little bit hopeful just because of that. I think the other thing that we do see is there have always been solutions to things. I mean, I also like I think people make this mistake of romanticizing the past, right? Which shouldn't be romanticized.
Mm.
But when we actually look at, for instance, the economics of previous eras in a lot of ways, the way that we handled things like progressive taxation was a lot different, right? It was actually much more progressive than it is now. We've eliminated a lot of those safety nets that we used to have. And the problem back then was those were not being applied to everybody equally. And the problem now is we've eliminated the sort of the basis for doing a lot of the things that we could have be doing now. It's not to say that those systems are the model to use now, but there are ways to learn from that and to, okay, we've lost something here, clearly. So it's funny when people have a bit of nostalgia for the past. It's like, okay, I can sort of understand where that would come from because there are aspects of previous places where also we just had people weren't as afraid to try things to make change happen as opposed to now. I think again another problem is we're so scared of, well, the solution, especially with climate stuff, it's like, oh, the solution must be impractical. No, it's not. It's actually like the best choice you can make, right? It's just
Yeah, it's right now it's cheaper, it's easier to implement, like quicker to implement than some of these mega solutions, all that kind of thing. And it is all the forces that are, have been shored up, that have the resources to counter the movement toward, what we call here energy democracy. That's kind of the problem. It's not the actual engineering or even to some degree the finances, where some of these energy sources now are becoming cheaper and cheaper. So it is
yeah.
sort of the institutionalization of some of those, knowledge banks, whether it's in utilities, or we've had many meetings with Nova Scotia Power over the years where we're just told time and time again, no, we can't, no, we can't. And it's like, well, actually, you can. And yeah, just, you mentioned like what are some of the wins this year. I think that idea of traction for the idea of energy democracy, which is in a very small nutshell, energy systems that folks in communities benefit from, support, and control through some kind of democratic process, be it a municipal utility or even other local ownership around the world, where those type of systems are actually way more responsive to what communities need. We know with climate change, we're going to need distributed energy sources, so we are more resilient to coming storms, fires, uncertainty, that kind of thing. And they have this extra plus of the profits being used for social good. So whether it's a childcare facility, whether it's supporting local cell service, which is, I know, is still an issue in a lot of rural places. So things like that. So like local social benefit, again, like there's so many benefits to it. And what I've seen by working with some of the networks that I've been part of, the strategy session we did in Newfoundland in the spring, which was so cool. It was on Bay du Nord, but we were also talking about alternatives and just transition, or the changing energy discourses, and in the research project that we're community partners with out of Fredericton, St. Thomas University. Whenever I raise this concept, it really is very sticky. Like people love it. And I'm really feeling, and we're starting to work on trying to get some workshops going so people can actually figure out how they would implement this in a practical way. So I think there's a real hunger for that. We're also seeing huge momentum for offshore wind in Eastern Canada, which could be a game changer for the energy system of this country and the literal and figurative power structure of this country as well, because it is such a potentially massive energy source, but it has to be done correctly. And again, I think that's where speaking to people about ways that the siting of these turbines can be done correctly so it isn't damaging ecosystems, but also benefits to communities happen and are required to happen, and that this energy gets to turn off coal and fossil fuel plants, not just for exporting hydrogen or other, or electrons directly to other places. Those are conversations I'm really looking forward to next year, but I've been pretty excited, I have to say, with the excitement out there for that concept. And yeah, I mean, I guess the other place where I think we're really advancing the dialogue is the area of the rights of nature and that connection with the natural world. And, we've been speaking a lot about connection with community, and when I think about that, I include nature in that. And I think that disconnect from nature, again, is part of a symptom of how disconnected things have become. And sort of the rights of nature idea is, again, a pretty old one and is really integral to a lot of Indigenous cultural and legal frameworks. But I think it could be integral to efforts at reconciliation, but it's also, I think, one of those transformative things that can shift us away from systems that are failing us, help restore that relationship, and help hopefully create more healthy ecosystems that support the beautiful diversity of life that is out there. I mean, one of the things I'm very proud of at Sierra Club is for a long time we stood up for the Gulf of St. Lawrence and stopping drilling in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and we've succeeded in that after many years of work with fishing organizations and tourism organizations and community groups and coastal communities and Indigenous leadership and municipal leadership as well for coastal communities. But this year we saw for the first time in a long time some of the fruits of that labor. The number of right whales, which is a critically endangered species, actually went up very slightly in the numbers, the estimates this year. And again, there's a lot of impacts on right whales up and down the eastern seaboard, having to do with ship strikes and entanglements and fishing gear. But I have to think that if drilling had gone ahead in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is now a really critical place for those whales, when they come up to our waters in the summer months, we wouldn't see that. Those whales would have been subjected to noise, ship traffic, potentially seismic blasting. It could have been devastating, and I don't think we would have seen that. And then, I guess up the river after many years of fighting, and again with groups like Legacy Fund for the Environment and Coalition Vert, the Green Coalition in Montreal, seeing the Technopark wetlands, which I really encourage folks to go to our website and look up the pictures of the birds that are there. If you're a bird lover, which I am, it's just spectacular. And this whole wetland area, which is also really important for monarch butterflies and other pollinators as well, of course, as many of these wetlands was slated for destruction. And folks essentially for many years said no, and there were walks organized, and there was actually a a legal challenge, and a lot of information unearthed about how developers' proposals in Montreal and Quebec are very seldom, if ever, rejected, no matter the ecological consequences. So a lot was unearthed through this battle. But it really looked potentially like we might lose one of these really significant habitats. And just this fall, we learned that there was going to be an agreement to purchase the land for preservation, and just a big win. And it's something that would not happen if people on the ground, and of course, not just Sierra Club, but groups in Montreal watching, alerting people to the significance and really pressuring and saying, no, this is not a place for the bulldozers and the cement trucks. Like this is such an important place. And that was so wonderful to see after so many years, and a beautiful legacy for one of our longstanding volunteers, Don Hobus in the Quebec chapter, and many, many others. Just that was great to see too. So yeah, I think reconnecting with community and including the community of life, I think is going to be really key in the year ahead. And really excited that rights of nature and us pushing that both through policy, but supporting groups that want to see the rights of nature concept adopted for river systems and other ecosystems, seeing that advance at a grassroots level. Really excited to see that. And if folks listening are thinking about this idea for the battles that you may be working on to protect nature, please reach out, because we want to find ways to connect you and create more knowledge and to share knowledge. That's kind of a role Sierra Club can play, I think, at this point is connecting people to speak about how this can be done, and done in a way that holds Indigenous rights and but also, I think, connects all of us better to nature.
Yeah, and I think well, and we've done a couple of podcasts about specifically rights of nature. I think we're up to 4 or 5 now that have to do with the subject, and a
Yeah,
couple, Gilbert and Yenny came on to actually chat about the
yeah,
Gatineau River
yeah.
and the Magpie River, and how that connects to those struggles connect to the fight for the rights of nature. And it's interesting with all these things. I mean, like, right, there's two things that come to mind, which is number one, these things happen at multiple levels, right? And I think we often get caught up in the federal politics world or the provincial politics or whatever concerns us. But sometimes these victories are partially municipal, they're partially provincial, they're partially federal, right? Like, it's not a question if it even has to do with policy. Sometimes it's a private win to do with a private company or something. There are lots of ways to create change and make action is one thing that I kind of draw from that. And the other thing is it can take years, right? Like, and I think that's one thing the club, Sierra Club Canada, has been really good at doing is sticking with these battles for potentially the years that it takes to get a win. And it does matter in the end, but it's just, and I think too, like the other thing is when you're in this stuff, it can be like a real feeling of this is never going to happen, right? At multiple points, I'm sure with Technopark, there were lots of points at which this is impossible. We're not going to be able to stop this. It's going to just get destroyed. And then in the end, there was a victory, right? And I think we've seen that in a couple of different things where, yeah, if you stick with it, it might take a long period of time, but if you stick with it, you can actually get these wins.
Yeah, exactly. And it is kind of there's that saying, all politics is local, and I think that's
Yeah.
something to remember in the year ahead. I think there have some great polls come out showing that Canadians still care very much about the environment. You're more familiar with those than I am, but and they are very committed in their value system to protecting nature, but also having the just transition away from oil and gas. Some of the battles that we are very much engaged in are actually do have quite a broad spectrum of political support out there. But yeah, just remembering that even though there may be a sort of overarching discourse that's happening that is discounting these things, this may be an issue you and your neighbors do actually have common ground on, and I think that's where, again, like being able to speak in a way that people understand and connects to their values is something I think we're going to be focusing on the year ahead. But also, you've also been doing great work through this podcast and through like communications and trying to get materials to folks that are the facts on issues like the emissions cap for the oil and gas sector, or here's how you talk about climate change, so that it isn't falling into those sort of tropes and silos, which again are designed to divide us. And where there is a broad spectrum of support, actually make that resonate out there in community. So, but yeah, sometimes it can be a long time coming. And the other thing I think we noticed this year with the New Brunswick situation with fracking rearing its ugly head again. And I don't know if folks across the country know this, but Atlantic Canada has been a real leader in the issue of fracking, where every single province, very much a grassroots campaign, and often Indigenous groups at the forefront of the battle, but also a lot of other grassroots groups fighting this. We essentially de facto bans on fracking in each
Yeah.
province out here. And unfortunately, the former premier of New Brunswick raised the idea of lifting the moratorium there. And one of the things I think, because we are connected to groups in the area that have been doing this grassroots for so long, but we can kind of be a little bit the memory bank for some of that work, because I think some folks that were new to issues in New Brunswick, I didn't actually even know or know much about that battle and how hard fought it was, and essentially what's at stake to your water system, to your energy systems, if fracking was actually allowed to go ahead. And so that was something we were able to, raise again some awareness on in collaboration with a lot of other groups again. And we saw change in government in New Brunswick, and we'll be watching closely to see what the new government says.
Mm.
They were relatively silent on the issue of fracking, but they were not cheerleaders. So that was, I guess, a win in a sense, like that's been safeguarded. But we just heard about 2 weeks ago that a new natural gas plant is now planned. So we got to put our
Well,
sneakers back on.
and I think it's one of these things
But
too. It's this
yeah,
idea that
yeah,
politicians per se act in a rational way and actually look like they often don't. It's really
no,
funny, but like they can have all the polling in the world that says, "Hey, this issue, like fracking is not popular," and they'll still keep going back to it. But I think that that's a good story because it's also something about there are all these grassroots victories happening all the time. Like we talked about the technopark, we talked about renewable energy democracy, we talked about rights of nature, right? Like there are all these little victories. And I think the nice thing about Sierra Club Canada is being involved in a lot of those things. Fracking is a big one in Atlantic Canada. Not many people know that a decade ago there was a huge fight against fracking in a lot of different parts of Atlantic Canada that was successful. And those same fights are happening in other parts of the country now,
yeah, yeah,
right? And have been happening since. But yeah, Atlantic Canada was one of the places where those fights were super successful against fracking, and there's a history there. In fact, what's the owner of the fracking company in Newfoundland who didn't get his way 10 years ago is now suing the provincial government because he says he's owed like $1 billion or something in compensation because he didn't get what he wanted. And
oh
I
my
know
God,
so far it's been dismissed as he's not going to get the money because under what rule does that exist? But also like, well, that's the pettiness that you're dealing with, right? It really was from day one just about one guy making a bunch, just by all the talk about local benefit and blah blah blah. It was really just about one guy and a few of his friends making a bunch of money, right? At the taxpayer's expense. Like if you
yeah,
even if you succeeded at suing the government, where's that money coming from? It's coming from Newfoundland and Labrador taxpayers, right? Like that's who's
yeah,
going to end up paying out for this fracking company if he even succeeded. Talked about the emissions cap. Okay. Yeah, we see these big multi-million dollar advertising spends, and now those
yeah,
are coming at
yeah,
the taxpayer's expense because the companies themselves have been finally held to the fact that they can't lie anymore,
yeah,
So now
yeah.
governments
Through
are
the
doing that
anti-greenwashing bill, yeah, exactly.
anti-greenwashing bill, but they're not unstoppable. Like when the polling actually came out after the Alberta campaign against the emissions cap, they hadn't even managed to convince half of Albertans to oppose it. Most people in Canada actually said it was either something they supported or something they wanted to see implemented correctly, like
Yeah,
65%. So that 67 said it was going to have at least some impact, if not significant impact for climate change. The thing with that campaign was, I think it was mostly there to convince politicians, and this is where the disconnect happens, right, between
yeah, hmm
politicians and the media and what people actually think. Because they
hmm
see the corporate stuff and they think, well, that must be the way people think. Well, that's not. And then I think they undermine themselves too because, well, they start listening to that corporate and people just stop having faith. And it goes
yeah,
against, it's like the decline in journalism in Canada and how pe people trusting journalism. It's not just because they were covering things like climate change, sometimes really well, it's because all the times they didn't. And it was very obvious that there was like this corporate angle making its way into the media. And it's like, well, then all the people who care about the honest journalism are just going to take a step back and be like, well, I don't really trust this anymore either, right?
Hmm.
Like, and
Hmm.
it's the same thing with politicians. It's the same thing across the board. When you assume that corporations just get what they want all the time, it's actually not a very smart move because a lot of people are, as we talked about at the beginning, waking up to the fact that there's some really unfair stuff happening around
Yeah.
the world and here locally, and that's not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, and yeah, sort of the veil is lifting, and I think in the year ahead, I hope we can collectively as a movement kind of start really making that really specific, if you know what I'm saying. Like let's actually show how so few of these these small cadre of people are actually benefiting from these this policies and yeah, essentially some governments or some politicians being willing to spend tax dollars to support them, whether it's a subsidy or whether it's a policy, an actual advertising campaign. Like I cannot tell you how, yeah, I was disgusted when I got my newspaper and saw that the cover was a misinformation, wasn't even labeled as advertising.
Yeah.
I mean, it did say at the bottom Alberta government, but it didn't say this is advertising. Anyway, so I think, yeah, just to be using our media institutions, which are so important now to relay this type of information. Yeah, it is it's really it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and I think we have to be the voice saying, actually, this is something like, as we've discussed, it's something people support, but also there are some folks who are very interested in seeing this not happen, and it's not about the well-being of you and your community. And we haven't even touched on the Protect What We Love exhibit and experience that we had in New York City going to
Yeah.
UN Climate Week, and then the follow up in Ottawa as well. But those exhibits were about highlighting the impacts of inaction on climate pollution to real people. And
Yeah.
some of these folks were so amazing. I mean, I think Connor, because we got to spend a few days with them, and you spent a few more when the Ottawa exhibit happened. But folks who have lost homes, had to move their entire life. Their community has moved because of Hurricane Fiona, and lost businesses, but still so committed and resilient to their communities. That was so obvious to me, whether they were championing elders circles or renewable energy or committed to actually increasing awareness on climate change and the need for climate action, supporting being really advocates for wildlife and birds. Like, it was just incredible to see both the diversity, because we know this, but this is becoming really real now. It's going to affect all of us across maybe all spectrums of society, but it's also, to me, the common thread was this sort of resilience and dedication to community. And I think that has to be the louder voice than the oil and gas lobby and those willing to speak on their behalf. So yeah, that
Well, like
was,
I
yeah.
don't think it's any coincidence that we held the Protect What We Love exhibit in Ottawa and met with 9 MPs and from most of the major political parties, right? The Liberals stopped by, the NDP stopped by, Greens, Conservatives stopped by. Like, a lot of people came to that exhibit. I don't think it's any wonder that the next week we saw the announcement of the draft regulations
Right.
finally, right? Like, when you actually, and
Many
that's the thing.
years coming. Yes, but anyway,
When
we
you
got
break
them.
past
Yeah,
that noise of the like the corporate lobbying, and you actually put leaders back in contact with the people who are
with
affected,
real people. Yeah.
with actual people, then suddenly it becomes in a way that it doesn't have to be aggressive or anything, right? It's just, here's people who have actually been impacted, right? And those were the voices that they should have heard the entire time and been listening to the most. And unfortunately, that's not what we've seen with the system that we have, is that those voices are not the ones that get heard, right? Or gets filtered through this lobbying PR effort where there are these conceptions of what's best for Canada, but no actual contact with the people most affected. I think that is something too that people pick up on, right? They're aware of the fact that there's all these barriers between themselves and politicians at the end of the day. And as for all the letter writing and the calling in, which is super important and have to keep doing that, those exhibitions were a really great chance to bring that directly and to connect with other, I mean, as you know, connect with, with other climate survivors, right?
Yeah.
Randomly in New York, running into people who'd been affected by Hurricane Sandy or affected by
Hmm.
a wildfire. They just
Yep.
happened to be there and they showed up and they went to the exhibit.
Yeah.
Geez, this happened to me.
Yeah.
Something like this happened to me. That's pretty telling if you can go to a random spot in New York and run into people who've been affected by climate change, right? Yeah.
Or, we were leafleting in front of the Central Library, which is quite a historic, gorgeous, one of those buildings in New York that you see in movies and TV shows. And anyway,
Yeah.
we were leafleting there, and one person goes by and he's like, "Oh yeah, my dad he was just at his house burn in Jasper." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh." Because it was, so recent after that. And of course your jaw drops, you kind of don't know what to say. But yeah, it's everywhere, it's everyone. And yeah, and I think that when I think back to how like again the higher, the zeitgeist, or like how the frame has shifted away from climate action this last year, and then I think back to my kind of career as an activist and doing things, and how, yeah, originally it wasn't something that was top of mind, and we were always celebrating if environment made it in the top 10 issues that Canadians cared about. Those were the days. Anyway, like I think there is something that has come out of the bottle since 2019 and the youth climate movement, and then also just with the fact that it's here and now, and it is in your face, it is in your house, it is, on the minds of your kids and your friends. Like I think we are not, it's not the same as those days when it was so hard to get the attention. I think more now it's bringing people together to, yeah, share values and actually speak in ways that folks can actually understand and get on board with. I mean, I think there is a bit of a timidity sometimes with, yeah, maybe some of our elected leaders not willing to say the thing that needs to happen. And forces that oppose climate action are not timid in any way, talking about what they want.
No. I mean,
And
I
I
mean,
think
no
we
doubt about
gotta
it.
like eschew that in 2025. Like this is the time for some boldness and telling it like it is. And again, in a way that actually people can understand and see that it is reflecting their values rather than it is something that is dissociated from their lives. And I think that's going to be really crucial.
Well, and I think that the problem too, you fall into it, even for leaders who are listening to this. I don't know if anybody is listening to this who's a political leader, but if you go back and forth on issues like climate change, nobody believes you stand for anything afterwards because
Yeah.
you said you cared about this thing, but you're not doing the thing to actually. And two, it doesn't have to be these drastic things. There's the emissions cap. It has broad appeal. It can be
Yeah.
accepted by anybody. Like I can hold very different views from somebody else who also supports it, which is great. It's nice to be able to be part of a conversation like that, right? It doesn't need to be completely radical stuff here, but you have to actually do it and you have to do it well. And you can, and that's the thing that came out of the polling is people wanted this done correctly. They wanted to implement it right. I think that that's a very rational point for anybody to have with any policy. That is the problem. We have all this political theater we talked about in the last episode above actual policies and solutions. And those are the things I think people are inherently more interested in the solutions. It's just unfortunately like the media landscape, social media, and unfortunately the journalism landscape has become obsessed with that political theater aspect and not the solutions aspect as opposed to that or the factual aspect or the myth busting stuff that I think it used to have more of a focus on, right? Social media has made that worse. We've seen politicians sort of get into the theater side of things. We've seen media get into the theater side of things. And it's, well, yeah, I mean, sure, that stuff's kind of important, but I don't think it's people are actually at right now, right? Like I don't talk to many
Yeah.
people who I really have a lot of faith in that to provide solutions. So
Yeah, we got our work cut out. But again, like I think that's why the membership these town halls this year with the emissions cap work, and it was really cool to have those face-to-face gatherings and getting folks together from different communities and just seeing how knowledgeable and resourced folks really are in community. But I think platforming that and making sure that we're continuing to create spaces for that, it's even more important, I think, now. So I think we're very committed to growing that membership and those membership opportunities, I think, in the year ahead. But yeah, that things like
And
that
there's been
can
some
just
success on
disrupt
that.
those kind of, dialogues. What's that?
Well, I was going
Yeah.
to say there's been some success on that because I know we have a membership coordinator this year who's
Yep.
taking over work,
Yep.
actually going out and canvassing a bit and talking to people at their
Yep.
homes,
And
right?
exactly.
We've
And
been able to
knocking on
canvass a lot
doors.
of people on these issues. However, or
Hmm.
not that results in a membership or it's just a good dialogue, right? Good conversation is also vital, right? Being able to hold how many town halls in the end? I think it was like 3 or 4 different town
One, two,
halls
three.
on emissions
On
cap.
emissions cap, which was
And,
cool. And,
yeah.
hopefully we will be continuing with some of the work, maybe turning toward energy democracy a bit in the new year with events like that, getting out interesting folks to talk about how they can take control of energy systems and have them benefit them instead of the fossil fuel industry or the nuclear industry. So that's going to be, a big focus. And just creating that sense of community, I think, is so important. And
Yeah.
sorry, I don't know if you can hear in the background, but I'm actually getting my basement insulated today. So if there is noise,
No,
it's
no,
for a good climate reason.
I'm not hearing it. I'm not
Okay,
hearing it
good.
here. Yeah, I do because I live in a basement apartment, so I have a joke that the heat goes up and the spiders come down. That's the that's kind of
Okay.
the but I've come to love the
Oh,
spiders because I've
Charlotte's
actually
Web
learned that
situation.
they're keeping much worse things out.
Ah,
So, actually they're my friends really.
oh yeah. Oh, we love spiders. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love spiders
Anyway,
here. We love spiders. Anyway, so sorry if there are a few bangs, but again, it'll be
oh no, it's
uh
fine.
hopefully keeping the house warmer.
Well, and I think too,
We
the other
yeah.
thing with the podcast, which has been good, we've been able to be part of sort of a podcasting community, and we've been able to actually, there's some other really cool podcasts that were happening that we were able to work with and cover. And there will be actually in the newsletter that's going out with this podcast is going to be like collections of some of the different topics we've covered because we have done a lot with Equinor Out, the international campaign, to get
Yeah.
Equinor to actually embrace
It's
renewable energy rather than oil and gas because
so
they
important.
could. It's one of those examples of a company that maybe more than others could right now go renewable and actually could do a lot of that local benefit stuff. It's in Newfoundland and Labrador, wherever they're working, could actually be doing that stuff. And they've been super successful. It's been great to be a part of that and to interview a lot of them for the podcast, right? To be able to get those stories down. Because you talk about institutional memory, right? One of the things I like about the podcasting thing is that it actually records what was going on in a period of time, and that can be super useful later. Maybe not a podcast live for a long period of time. The episodes stay up there, and people can listen to them and get an idea later on. It's been a great thing to be able to do, which is thanks in part to a lot of advice from people. Jessica's been doing some amazing episodes too on and I think
Yeah.
this is the thing when we talk about some of the successes this year are really around capacity building. Like Jessica's been able to do some great podcasts with people who are experts in communications, and it's informed a bunch of my work because
Mm.
I've now looked at what they're doing and oh yeah, that's a great idea, or that's a really good approach that I hadn't thought about, right? Like, and that's a resource that's not just there for us; it's there for the entire environmental movement, right? To be able to check out to learn from those experts, right? Like that's. I think a lot of this year has been about around like capacity building. It's been great to see that come about.
Yeah, totally. And just so grateful to Jessica and you and the team. Christina Jackson, also our operations director, for kicking off a podcast that I think is needed more than ever based on the work of Joanna Macy, the work that reconnects and kind of reconnecting us to like what motivates us, but also like what can generate, I think what Joanna Macy calls active hope, needed more than ever these days. And just an opportunity again to revitalize, however you're feeling, but also learning from others and where they're at in the movement. So yeah, that's also an amazing resource. But also, yeah, like you're saying, like having those podcasts out there as a resource for people is really cool. So we can kind of navigate some of the things that we're dealing with. And we do have, two pretty big fossil fuel fights on our hands right now, if not more, with this new natural gas plant in New Brunswick.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we've got the Bay du Nord decision might come this year, and we did our last arguments in that case late this fall. So we will get a decision from the judges sometime in the new year, I hope. And whichever way that goes, whether the Minister of Environment and Climate Change is asked to reassess their decision to approve it, or if it goes against us and it supports the decision to approve that project, I think we need to be ready, and our allies need to be ready to respond. And yeah, also just furthering the work in Newfoundland and Labrador to support voices, again, that are questioning and opposing continued subsidies in the oil and gas sector,
Mhm.
and want to see greater climate action. That's going to
And green
be,
solutions for,
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah,
province. Well,
yeah.
and the court
And
cases
pressuring Equinor, like you say, which is supposedly a progressive.
come do something useful, right? Versus,
Yeah.
rather than making the decision. It's funny, we talked
Yeah.
with a renewable energy expert on the podcast, and she said basically the problem is they don't have enough people to fill jobs. That's going to be the upcoming issue with green
There we
energy.
go.
So,
Yeah.
like, if that's the case, well, great, Equinor,
Let's
come do
let's get
that.
upskilling. Yeah. Let's get
Yeah,
upskilling,
and
folks. Yeah.
work
Yeah.
with communities, because unlike a
Yeah.
lot of other corporations, I think they would have the ability to work with communities more closely because they are partially state owned, so they're a little bit more beholden to somebody, right? But I think the other thing that maybe comes up, I think the court case, for instance, right, and working with MTI and Indigenous communities to you feel that they weren't. That's the entire basis of the case at this point. Is there are communities that were not consulted adequately on the
Properly.
project, and
Exactly.
I think another big thing, no matter what the outcome is that I'm very happy is that we've been able to actually do that. The in a legal
Yeah.
concept, that should be where a lot of our focus as a movement
Is
is. Well,
is
right?
and I just want to say, calling an oil company progressive, I might get flack for that, but I mean in the sense that it is majority owned by the people of Norway, which are, has as a country done so
Yeah,
many progressive things, including putting aside the royalties and the benefits from oil and gas to a fund that can really shift things, but also, yeah, because of
yeah.
that public nature of the company, and the progressive commitments that the country has made for climate action, they should have leverage there to stop new drilling like Bay du Nord, right?
Well, and I remember
Yeah,
saying this to an Ecuador person when I met with them. I get that you're proud of your company, and I understand people who are proud of having worked in the oil and gas industry, right? A lot of workers have a lot of pride in that. I get it. It's not about where we're at now, it's about where we're going,
where we
right?
have to go,
About what we do next that's going to matter. And the same challenge there of building a new industry from scratch is there with renewable energy, and it's on this generation of everybody to make that happen in a way that is better than the one that the previous industry that came before it. And you're right, I don't want to call an oil gas company progressive, but maybe accountable is the word, right? Like
Yes,
the
maybe that was a better word. There,
and
that's
most
why you're in
Norwegians
communications.
and most Norwegians I've met, I've gotten a chance to meet a lot of Norwegians. Most Norwegians are very climate conscious people. I think they just
Yeah,
maybe don't get to connect sometimes between this is what your state-owned company does at
in other
times
places. Yeah.
and is doing, and I think that that's more the problem. But I would much rather see a renewable energy partnership with Norway, because there are so many things that we do have in common with them, and that whether that's environmentally or
Public benefits for these energy sources too, whether it's offshore wind or whatever it is. But yeah, so that's really key. And I guess our other big fight with which Jessica Murray's leading is the Line 5 fight. And I'm thinking of the last year, definitely connecting with our sister organization in the US, Sierra Club, has been
yes.
just really huge, and that's partly the leadership of their executive director Ben Jealous coming and visiting us a couple times. That's been pretty cool. But also just that the battle for Line 5, which is a pipeline that crosses the Strait of Mackinac in the a pinch point between two of the Great Lakes. There, the heart of the Great Lakes, or the heart of Turtle Island, is sometimes what it's called. But it's an aging pipeline. Ideally, it is not replaced, but it's one where there's a real risk of a spill affecting, the drinking water for millions of people, and never mind the ecological consequences. But then,
Another
this
indigenous
is
group whose land it's on saying we want
yeah,
it shut down.
yeah, this is on our
Your
territory. You're
term limit
trespassing. Yeah,
has gone. You are
yeah,
now
yeah.
trespassing.
Yes.
We signed, the contract for this period of time. That time has expired. And
Mm,
again, a company gains special treatment as opposed to when we know, like, Line 5 doesn't contribute much economically, actually, despite the fear-mongering, it's not that important. It is an aging pipeline. It's not functioning very well. It's one of those things, and a lot of that oil just comes back up through Canada. It
yeah,
goes, and so it is one of those things where it's been good to, and as you said, to connect with the US Sierra Club, because again, for anybody
yeah,
listening who isn't aware, we're different organizations. We don't
yeah,
actually share any sort of management. We
yeah,
we share branding, and that's basically it. Same thing with Sierra Club BC. We're separate organizations. We're in the rest of Canada and they're in BC. But it's been great over the past year to work and to get to coordinate more and more of them. And I think with certain geopolitical situations coming up, being able to connect with activists in the United States and, also provide support from the Canadian side, hopefully, is going to become more and more important because they're going to be in a really big fight. And
yeah,
we do have the ability here to maybe hopefully be a bit of a grounding force that can actually help with what they're doing and help them stay safe. Being a
yeah,
benefit of us reaching out a lot this past year, I think, is that we've been well
yeah.
positioned to do some of that work.
Yeah, and sending delegations and creating awareness. And yeah, in the new year, we'll be doing screenings of the Bad River film. So very
Yeah,
excited for that, just to create that awareness. I think it's in Montreal and Toronto are the screenings that are
it is
planned,
indeed.
but we may do more. But I've only seen the trailer for this film, but I think it's going to be a bit of a heartbreaker, but
I've seen
also,
it actually.
have
I
you?
have, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's
Uh,
a really good film. Do
yes.
100% come out end of January, early February. I might even have the information in the newsletter, or I can put it below the podcast. And yeah, do come out and join us for that because it's going to be a really, yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is one of those fights. I mean, this is an Enbridge pipeline, Enbridge not being publicly owned like Equinor or majority publicly owned. So
Yeah.
we're dealing with with different cat or tiger here. But but again, I guess when I think about what's happened in US politics in the last fall and Line 5, I mean, this is again where I really think all politics is local and working with folks safer, cleaner energy systems that will benefit everybody. I think that's something we're going to be doing. Again, speaking to those values, speaking to community members, working with allies in the area. So I think that's going to be really cool. But we will have our work cut out, but I think it's also one of those cases where if you can get down to the level of speaking to what people actually care about, outside of
Mhm.
what you know, uh,
Whatever the
political
show
party
happens.
they belong to, or
Yeah.
so the wind of politics, whichever way that wind is blowing, I think that'll be really key to this fight. And so I'm pretty, again, like really excited to see how that battle goes in the new year and how we can be effective in that. I don't think many Canadians know that the Canadian government has been there backing up Enbridge in some of these legal battles to protect a pipeline over Indigenous rights. I mean, that's pretty shocking to me. So
Well,
I
and I think
think,
it's one of
yeah,
those things
yeah,
we always assume that the United States is doing this pro pipeline stuff somewhere, doing something, generally
mm,
speaking, is doing something internationally not good that has something to do with oil, right? Like that's kind of the assumption about geopolitical politics. But here's the instance where Canada is doing something internationally not good to do with oil,
with to
right?
do with
Like
oil
yeah,
to protect a
I
pipeline.
mean,
Yeah,
and Americans are actually the ones saying we don't want this.
actually, yeah,
Indigenous people in the United States as well saying, we don't want this. Canada then stepping in and being, well, we're going to try to force this on people. It really is, and the amount of power and influence too that Enbridge has wielded in U.S. politics is not to be discounted. And we have, on a more general level, we've talked recently about the situation that we're all finding ourselves in with tariffs coming up and everything. Well, thank the oil and gas industry for that. They're the people who made that possible, right? Like without their influence, none of this would be happening right now. Would not be in this situation. One thing, and that's partially the fact that unfortunately when you put a bunch of misinformation out there, it takes on a life of its own as well, right? it's going to do things that are even, I mean, I think in their case, they very much consciously created this situation that we're in. But it's also going to lead to a bunch of things that they probably didn't even intend because misinformation can spread like a virus, right? And viruses mutate. And there's not,
Hmm.
you can't tell what the end result is going to be, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
problem with it, right? Like yeah, that's why you
Yeah.
have to stop
Whisper
it
down the
before.
alley. What's going to be the message that comes back when it comes back to your ears? Exactly.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
You don't know.
you
Uh,
don't know. You don't know. I mean, the consequences can be
hmm,
really, I mean, we talk about climate consequences and, throwing a gigantic wrench into our climate system and just watching what chaos that's going to come out of it. The same thing is happening with our media ecosystem, right? There's just
yeah.
not the pollution essentially, right? Being thrown into our media ecosystem. And that's just, it creates uncertainty, creates instability, and that the common shared reference that we all have with each other, which to be fair, again, we talked about some of those inequality things, was already suffering, I think, because some people have in leadership roles have expectations that are up here for certain things. Everybody else is like in a different mindset, more focused on their lives.
Yeah.
Already that was creating dissonance, and now with misinformation it just creates chaos, right? And you don't know what the end result is going to be. Yeah, but anyway, I'm ranting at this point. Thank you so much, Gretchen, for joining
Well,
me today. I
thank you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you. And just invite everyone listening to check out the other podcasts that you've done such a great job this year. And with this, I'm very glad to be at this whirlwind year-end podcast with you at the end of 2024, looking at the cusp of 2025. And yeah, just invite you all to join in our work, join us as members. Yeah, come out to events if they're happening in your local community. And yeah, definitely speak to your neighbors and friends. And we have so much in common with our neighbors, and I think if we open up those conversations, I think we have a chance to be a real positive and powerful force. And I think some recent events have shaken our confidence, but I think if we're real with each other and we're real with what we really care about, we can do some really transformative work with CR Club and with the movement in the year ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Gretchen, for all of your work. And it's a pleasure as always to work with yourself and the team and to get a chance to highlight these stories. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the work everybody's doing that really makes things like the podcast just a breeze because all you have to do is sit down and have a conversation. You don't really have to do anything. It makes a huge difference when the actual
Mm,
content that you have to communicate on is great content, right? Like
mm.
I really feel bad for anybody who works in public relations for the oil and gas industry because they spend their entire day just trying to figure out how to lie about something that's
Trying to
terrible, right? And they
make up
must know,
stories.
like they must know in their heart that like this is just I don't really want to be here. Like I would hope anyway that they're feeling that.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. And I didn't even touch on this, but the stats are showing renewables are surpassing oil and gas in terms of like where
yeah,
investment in power generation is coming from. So folks who are in that sector, like do some exploration because there might be some opportunities elsewhere where you can
yeah,
apply those skills and talents.
totally.
But yeah, like we all have stories, and yeah, I know we're wrapping up here, but just even folks like David Snyder, who was past president and just longtime volunteer, and the way he and his community stood up to some of the destruction plan for a land that was given as an ecological gift to the community, but then it was going to be torn up and with inappropriate trails and parking lots. But those folks, because they are knowledgeable of what the value of that land was to birds and trees and species and to the community, were able to effectively tell a different story about what was possible. And I think some of that work is still ongoing, but again, it kind of speaks to, like you're saying, we all have a local knowledge and a story and a way we want to see our community go, and having those folks who are able to connect with others and create community around battles or positive things like Wild Child. That's kind of one of our key
We
strengths.
didn't
And
even talk about Wild Child, and
let's
that's like really
yeah,
outdoor
like
education program. Like this is the thing. It's like what I don't even know exactly how many staff we have on at the moment, but it's not a big team. And we're running not only we're doing all this climate change stuff. It's like Equinor came out with that statement. Equinor's lawyers said something like we're one of the most, if not the most sophisticated ENGO in Canada.
In Canada.
I was thinking to myself, yeah, there's like, but within
Yeah,
that team of people, also there's like four people who maybe focus on climate change related stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
specifically, so
yeah.
much of that team
I
is also
mean,
dedicated to like Wild Child, right? Like which
yeah,
is an outdoor
which is
education program for kids, which has
kids and changing lives every day, and
yeah, it's doing that, so
yeah,
that's pretty good that we've been able to be involved in all these different
yeah,
things. And I think too, as you say, it's finding the connection between these things.
yeah, yeah,
That I think the problem when you focus when you're a specialist in just one type of environmental issue, right? And there are organizations out there that maybe focus on that, which is great, but you miss the connections to the other aspects of the movement, right? That you can and that's the bringing people together thing that can happen. That's where you can actually create lasting changes is through that. So it's a great thing
mm,
to be able to be a part of. But Wild Child, yeah, I don't know
yeah.
if you want to say a couple of words on Wild Child before we go.
Yeah, well, wild child, and it's funny because this time of year I start knitting like a fiend, and the person that taught me to knit properly, I mean, people tried over the years, but the person that broke through was Heidi Verhoel, who was the founder of and that just shows what a good educator she is. Because I am not that good, but I have gotten me better. And yeah, so anyway, so she founded that in 2010, and it really came out of we were doing environmental education for many, many years as a club. I mean, the club's been around 50 years or more now, but for years. And one of the things she was noticing, and other educators were noticing that were doing classroom-based programming, was that even when they put up more common species to talk about them, some of the kids had not seen them. Like they had not seen a deer, they had not seen a squirrel, even I think in one case. Or I was
Yeah,
tabling once, and some Girl Guide leaders came over and said, "Oh yeah, we had camp, but the girls came out of the lodge and they were terrified because they saw the night sky for the first time, and they had not
that's
seen the
such a
night
sad
sky.
thing.
Like they had not seen the
Yeah,
stars like that." And
yeah.
so really a sense that, okay, we got to get folks out. We got to get folks out of the
Yeah.
classroom into nature. So that's where Wild Child came from. And this is part of a global movement, forest school movement, that getting kids out in nature, exploring on their own terms, learning skills, learning to take risks, but also to assess risk, and yeah, learning to help each other, help nature. So yeah, we have Wild Child schools now, forest schools happening in Edmonton and in PEI. We had one in Halifax up until very recently, and we're trying to rejuvenate that one. And we'd like to
Mhm.
see it expand. And yeah, just the work that they are doing, both to help folks that may not have an opportunity to connect with nature on a regular basis, through that programming, and doing really innovative things with indigenous knowledge keepers to kind of create that idea of connectivity with the land, and whose land and territory is this. And also, some of the work with LGBTQ community, like, the youth. So I think just really innovative stuff, but it's also like whenever you see the posts, like testimonials from the parents about how
Yeah.
transformative it is for their kids, it just shows the power of connecting to nature, and how important that is just to all of our health, but also to the health of the community as a whole, to keep that connection. So I guess one of my yeah, our hopes for next year is to have more outdoor events so that we can do a bit of adult wild childing for everybody. And kind
I
of
think
have
everybody needs
in
that,
each
right?
chapter have those opportunities too, because it is just so essential, and it is, yeah, just to our health overall, but it's nature's a great connector too, because it's amazing when you go on a trail, like who you see there and what they're interested in, and what they know about this ecosystem. If you have like a casual conversation, whether it's a city park or you're out there canoeing or something on the shore, but it is amazing. And yeah, just a great source of connection. So, but yeah, Wild Child is amazing and long running program. Very proud of it. And yeah, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of outdoor time for these youth and kids. So pretty amazing.
Thanks again, Gretchen, for joining me today. And yeah, looking forward to
Yeah.
2025.
Yeah. Happy holidays and happy new year. It's gonna be a fun one. And let's start flexing our muscles, and yeah, let's have some fun with it too.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Before we go today, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. We also have the podcast previous to this one about how to talk to others during the holiday season, during those perhaps more complex conversations that you might be having about these topics or climate change or environment in general. Please do check that out. That's the episode previous to this one. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on CHMA Radio in Sackville, New Brunswick on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Atlantic Daylight Time. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe to get the latest episodes from us.